My mother grabbed my wrist before I could sit down. Not a gentle touch. A grip. The kind that leaves a mark you don't notice until later, when you're alone and finally looking at your own skin. "The kitchen," she hissed. "Go check on the food. This table is for people who matter today." My brother-in-law laughed. He actually laughed, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. Which, as far as everyone in that dining room believed, he was about to. I set my purse down by the door instead of the chair I'd been heading toward. I didn't say anything. I went to the kitchen and I checked on the food that didn't need checking. His name was Derek. He'd married my sister Vanessa 6 years ago, and from the moment he walked into our family's orbit, he'd done one thing exceptionally well. He'd convinced my father that he was the son my father always wanted. Derek talked big. He talked constantly. He had the kind of confidence that gets mistaken for competence by people who've never seen real competence up close. That Sunday was his big announcement. He'd been hinting at it for weeks. Something about a partnership. Something that was going to change everything. My parents had bought him a new blazer for the occasion. My mother had made pot roast, which she only made for celebrations. I stood at the kitchen counter and listened to the sound of my family through the wall. I've been listening through walls my entire life. Growing up, I was the practical one. The quiet one. The one my father described to his friends as the responsible daughter, in a tone that made it clear responsible was the consolation prize. Vanessa got the compliments. Vanessa got the spring break trips and the car at 16 and the parents who showed up to every school event with a video camera. I got good grades, nobody framed, and a college fund that was quietly redirected to Vanessa's wedding when I was 19. Because you're more independent, sweetheart, you'll figure it out. I figured it out. I worked as a paralegal during school and graduated with a degree in finance and approximately zero illusions about how my family saw me. When I landed a job at a distressed asset firm in Charlotte, my father asked if that was like working at a pawn shop. When I got promoted to senior analyst at 28, my mother asked whether I was seeing anyone because a career is fine, but it's not everything. I did not explain what I actually did for a living. Not in full. It felt pointless. And honestly, the less they knew, the better. What I do is this. I find companies that are bleeding, companies that made bad bets, or got over-leveraged, or got run by people who had Derek's exact energy. Loud, reckless, convinced the rules of financial gravity didn't apply to them. I buy their distressed debt, sometimes for 15 cents on the dollar, and then I either help them restructure or I dismantle them carefully and recover the value that's left. It requires patience. It requires being very comfortable sitting quietly in a room while other people underestimate you. I had been practicing that particular skill since I was 11 years old. Derek's announcement was about a company called Hargrove Capital Group. It was a private equity boutique based in Atlanta, small but aggressive, known in certain circles for flashy deals and flexible ethics. He'd been pursuing a junior partnership there for almost a year. The buy-in was $200,000. He didn't have it. What he had was a wife whose parents owned a commercial property in Forsyth County free and clear. A small strip mall my grandfather had built in the 1980s that currently generated about $140,000 a year in rental income. My parents had been planning to sell it when they retired. It was their exit strategy, their whole retirement picture. Derek wanted to use it as collateral. He had apparently been working on my father for months. My father, who once told me that real wealth is built by men who aren't afraid to bet on themselves, had been warming to the idea slowly, like a frog in water that keeps getting incrementally hotter. I only found out about it 3 weeks earlier, and only by accident. Vanessa had called me, not to ask my opinion, but to complain that I'd be at the family dinner, and she didn't want me asking uncomfortable questions. She said, and I remember this exactly, "Just don't make Derek feel stupid, okay? This is a big deal for him, and Dad already said yes in principle, and I just need Sunday to go smoothly." She hung up before I could respond. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and searched Hargrove Capital Group for about 40 minutes before I felt something cold and specific settle into my chest. The SEC had flagged them twice in the past 18 months. Their fund-to-fund structure was showing classic signs of a capital raise designed to paper over redemption requests. New money coming in to pay out old commitments, the wheels spinning faster and faster. Their managing director had 2 civil judgments against him in Georgia and 1 in Tennessee. The junior partnership that Derek was so excited about, it wasn't a real partnership. It was a fee. They were selling access to a brand, and the brand was already on fire. My first instinct, genuinely, was to call my father. I picked up my phone. I actually had his contact open. And then I sat there for a long moment and thought about the summer I turned 24, when I drove 3 hours to help my parents move furniture after my father threw out his back. And Derek sat on the couch the entire day playing games on his phone while I carried boxes in 100-degree heat. And when I left, my mother hugged Vanessa and said, "I'm so glad you have someone to take care of you." She waved at me from the door. I put my phone down. I went back to my laptop and I started doing what I do. Within a week, I had a full picture of Hargrove Capital Group's debt structure. They were carrying $3.1 million in secured debt to a regional lender that was quietly trying to exit the position. I made contact through my firm. 12 days before that Sunday dinner, we closed. We purchased the controlling debt position for 62 cents on the dollar. Hargrove Capital Group was now, for all practical purposes, mine to restructure or dissolve. I had one of our compliance officers, a former federal examiner named Howard who has a face like weathered granite and a voice like a contract being signed, positioned as an independent auditor who would be a Derek's partnership signing the following Monday. Howard was there to verify funds. He was also there to watch. But first, there was Sunday dinner. I stood in my parents' kitchen and plated the green beans. My father appeared in the doorway. He looked good. He'd gotten the haircut. He was wearing the watch he only wore when he felt important. "Trying to hide back here," he said, but not unkindly. That was the confusing thing about my father. He wasn't cruel the way some fathers are cruel. He was just selectively blind. He loved the idea of his children more than the actual children who existed in front of him, and Derek had somehow made himself fit the idea perfectly. "Just making sure everything's ready," I said. "Derek's going to walk us through the terms after we eat." He said it with a pride that I recognized as borrowed. It was Derek's pride. My father was just storing it for him. "Big move, Rosalind. You could stand to take a few notes." "Rosalind. That's me. I'm sure it'll be interesting," I said. He went back to the dining room. I carried the green beans out 2 minutes later and took the seat closest to the kitchen because that's the seat nobody fights over. Dinner was fine. Derek held court, as Derek does. He talked about the Hargrove partners like they were old friends, dropping first names, describing their vacation homes. Vanessa watched him with the specific expression she'd been wearing for 6 years, somewhere between adoration and anxiety. The look of someone who has tied their identity to a kite and can feel the wind picking up. My mother refilled everyone's wine. She did not refill mine. I don't think she did it on purpose. I genuinely don't think she noticed. After the pot roast, Derek spread some papers on the table. He printed them out in color, which was a nice touch. There was a logo. The Hargrove logo, dark blue and gold, which I happened to know had been designed by a Fiverr contractor 8 months ago when they rebranded to look more established. "This is the operating agreement," Derek said, pointing at pages he clearly hadn't fully read. "Junior partners get a 12% carry on the fund performance, plus a seat on the investment committee. But the window closes Friday. They've got 3 other candidates. I told them we were good for it." My father nodded slowly. My mother pressed her hand over her mouth in that way she does when she's moved. "What's the collateral arrangement again?" I asked. Vanessa shot me a look across the table. Derek smiled the way he smiles when he thinks someone is about to be impressed. "The strip mall goes as a deed of trust against the buy-in. 30-day release. Once my first carry distribution hits, we retire the lien. Standard structure for illiquid partners." "Who holds the deed of trust?" I asked. "Hargrove's fund administrator." "And you verified the fund administrator is a licensed escrow entity in Georgia?" Derek's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes recalibrated slightly. "It's all in the agreement." "I'm sure it is," I said, and I looked down at my plate. My father cleared his throat. "Rosalind, Derek has done his homework on this." "I know he has," I said. "I'm just curious. What I didn't say was, the fund administrator listed in that operating agreement was a single-member LLC incorporated in Delaware 11 months ago with no physical office and a registered agent who also manages 11 other shell entities for a fee. I had pulled that information at 7 that morning while drinking my first cup of coffee. After dessert, my father and Derek moved to the living room. I helped my mother clear the table because that's what I do. My mother stacked dishes and talked about how proud she was, how Derek had a vision, how Vanessa was finally going to have the stability she deserved. I rinsed plates and listened and did not say anything. "You know," my mother said, handing me a serving dish, "it wouldn't hurt you to be more supportive. Derek's doing something brave." "What does brave mean in this context?" I asked. She sighed. "You've always been so cautious, Rosalind. It's a little exhausting, honestly. Not everything is a risk analysis." I dried the serving dish. I put it away. I knew exactly where it went because I'd been putting it away since I was 10. "You're right," I said. "I'll work on that." That night I called Howard and confirmed the timing. Monday, 2 o'clock, Hargrove's office in Atlanta. I told him what to watch for. I drove to Atlanta Monday morning. I parked 2 blocks from the Hargrove office, which was on the 14th floor of a building that also housed a dental practice and a mid-tier accounting firm, professional enough to look legitimate, not prominent enough to attract scrutiny. I did not go upstairs. I sat in my car with my laptop and a coffee, and I waited. Howard was already inside. Derek would arrive at 2. My father was driving down separately. Derek had wanted him there for the moment, which should have been its own kind of red flag, but wasn't. Because my father had spent 30 years learning to see Derek-shaped things as opportunities. At 1058, I watched Derek's Range Rover pull into the parking garage across the street. New lease. I knew this because Vanessa had mentioned 6 months ago that they'd gotten the great deal. The lease payment was $1,100 a month. Derek's last filed tax return showed $67,000 in income. At 2004, Howard texted me, "In the room. Your father just arrived. Starting verification." I opened my laptop. Howard's role was straightforward. As independent auditor attached to the fund's compliance process, he was required to verify liquid assets before any deed of trust was recorded. This was, he would explain to Derek, new SEC guidance for fund buy-ins following recent enforcement actions. It required a real-time bank verification, not printed statements. Derek would need to log into his actual account and display the balance on the screen. At 2019, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. "Ms. Vance," the voice said. It wasn't Howard, it was Derek. He had found my number. I don't know how. Probably through Vanessa, probably panicked and grabbed her phone. His voice was strange, tight and weirdly formal, like he was trying to perform calm. "Derek," I said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." A pause. "This auditor." "Howard. Did you send him?" I looked out through my windshield at the parking garage. "Why would I do that?" I said. "Because you were asking questions last night. You knew things you shouldn't have known about the fund structure." "I asked about the fund administrator," I said. "That's public record." Silence. "Derek," I said. "Do you have $200,000 in your account?" He didn't answer. Which was the answer. Because if you're about to sign a deed of trust against my parents' property to buy into a fund that's going to be dissolved by its debt holders within 90 days, I said, that's something you should probably know before your father-in-law signs anything. The silence this time was different. Longer. "What did you do?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was the sound of something falling. "I'm going to come upstairs now," I said. "Please don't leave." Howard met me at the elevator. He handed me a folder without a word. I walked into the conference room and the first thing I saw was my father's face, and the expression on it was one I had never seen before. Not anger, not confusion, but a kind of provisional stillness. Like a man who has just noticed the ground might not be entirely solid and is waiting to find out how bad it is. Derek was standing near the window with his arms crossed. Vanessa wasn't there. She'd stayed home. The Hargrove managing director, a man named Preston who had an expensive haircut and the general energy of someone who has been topped out of handcuffs twice, was seated at the head of the table with his own attorney beside him. I sat down and I opened the folder. "I'm Rosalind," I said to Preston. "My firm acquired your senior debt position 14 days ago. I have the documentation here if you'd like to review it. You are currently in default on the primary covenant. That means the restructuring process begins at my discretion." Preston looked at his attorney. His attorney looked at the folder. "We have until Q4 to the covenant default triggered at the 90-day mark on the Whitfield redemption," I said. "That was 11 days ago. I have the notice of default here as well." I placed it on the table. My father was very still. I looked at Derek. "You don't have the $200,000. Not a question." His jaw tightened. "It's in transition, Derek." I kept my voice even. "Howard ran the verification. Your account balance is $14,800 and change." "I've seen the number. So has your father-in-law." My father turned to look at Derek. It was a slow turn. The kind that takes something with it when it moves. "The partnership you were buying into," I continued, "is going to be in receivership before Thanksgiving. The buy-in fee has been used to pay out redemptions from earlier investors. It's not an investment, it's a delay mechanism." I looked at Preston, which he knows. Preston said nothing. His attorney put a hand on Preston's arm. "If my father signs that deed of trust today," I said, "he will lose the Forsyth property. Not in 30 days when Derek's carry distribution supposedly clears. Permanently. Because there will be no distribution. There will be no fund. There will be federal mail fraud charges and a receiver and a line of creditors, and my parents will be in that line behind people who put in a lot more than $200,000. The room was very quiet. My father said, "Derek." Just the name. Nothing else. Derek unfolded his arms and then didn't know what to do with his hands. "I was going to tell you," he said. "Not to me. To my father. The timing wasn't right yet. The funds were. You were going to use our property," my father said, "to buy into something you knew." "I didn't know," I thought. "You had $14,000, my father said. His voice had gone somewhere flat and distant I'd never heard before. "You told me you had the money ready." Derek looked at me then, and whatever he saw in my face, not triumph, I want to be clear, I wasn't smiling, I was tired. Whatever he saw made him stop talking. I turned to Preston. "I'm prepared to offer you two options. Option 1, we proceed to formal receivership, and I refer the redemption structure to the SEC's Atlanta office, which I will be doing regardless, but the timing becomes public and immediate. Option 2, you sign a consent to voluntary dissolution, cooperate fully with the receiver I appoint, and I give you 60 days to notify your remaining investors personally before the filing becomes public record." I slid a document across the table. "I would recommend option 2. Preston looked at his attorney for a long moment. His attorney nodded once. Preston picked up the pen. I looked at my father. His hand was resting on the deed of trust that Howard had prevented him from signing. The paper was still blank where his signature would have gone. "You should take that home," I said. "And then nothing needs to happen with it." He looked at me. Really looked at me, maybe for the first time in a long time, and I watched him trying to locate himself in the new version of the room we were both sitting in. "How long have you?" he started. 14 days since I bought the debt," I said. "I've been doing this kind of work for 6 years. He was quiet for a moment. "You could have told me." "I called you," I said. "You didn't answer." That was technically true. I had called him on the wrong day at the wrong hour, and he hadn't picked up, and I hadn't left a message. I'm still not entirely sure why I chose that framing. Some things don't fully untangle. We left the building separately. Derek sat in his Range Rover in the parking garage for 45 minutes before he drove away. I know because Howard's car was on the same level and Howard texted me the timestamp. My father called me that night. He didn't apologize, not directly. What he said was, "I didn't know what you did," which is the closest my father gets, I think, to admitting that the not knowing was partly a choice. "I know," I said. "You could have lost money on that," he said. "You could have lost money on that," he said. "Buying that debt. If the restructuring doesn't." "I know the risk," I said. "I do this for a living." Another silence. "The strip mall," he said. "We almost, but you didn't," I said. Vanessa didn't call me for 3 weeks. When she did, she called to tell me that she and Derek were separating and that she hoped I was satisfied. I told her I was sorry that she was going through something painful. I meant it. She hung up. My mother called the following Saturday. She asked if I wanted to come for dinner. Not a special dinner, just dinner. I said yes, and she said good, and then was quiet for a beat too long in the way she gets when she wants to say something she hasn't figured out how to say yet. The green beans were good last Sunday, she finally said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was my mother handing me the only olive branch she knew how to hold, and I had spent enough years being angry at people for the vocabulary they didn't have. I'll bring dessert, I said. The forced property is still in my parents' name. The rental income covers my father's retirement just fine. Preston's voluntary dissolution proceeded without a federal referral, which was more grace than he deserved, but made the process cleaner. 3 of his former investors filed a civil suit regardless, which is their right. Derek found a sales position at a tech company in Nashville. I know this because Vanessa told me, about 2 months into their separation, in the careful tone of someone who is deciding whether to be grateful or resentful and hasn't finished deciding yet. I still go to Sunday dinners sometimes. I still sit nearest to the kitchen. Some things change slower than a courtroom. That's okay. I've got patience. It's kind of my whole thing. I still think about the green beans, not the boardroom. Not the look on Derek's face when the numbers came up on Howard's screen. Not even my father's hand, frozen over that deed of trust he almost signed. I think about standing at my parents' kitchen counter, plating green beans that nobody asked me to plate, listening to the sound of my family celebrating through the wall. That's where it all lived, I think. Not in the conference room in Atlanta. In that kitchen. In all the kitchens before it. There's something I've come to understand about the way consequences actually work. Not the dramatic movie version, but the real version. They don't arrive like lightning. They accumulate. Every choice Derek made, every exaggeration, every lease payment on a car he couldn't afford, every time he looked my father in the eye and said, "The money's ready," those weren't separate events. They were a single long decision, compounding quietly in the background, the same way my choices compounded. 6 years of learning the work. 6 years of being careful and precise and honest about what I knew and what I didn't. The outcomes in that Atlanta conference room didn't happen because the universe decided to balance a ledger. They happened because of the specific, boring, unglamorous decisions that 2 people made over years. Derek's decisions led him one place. Mine led me somewhere else. I don't think I'm better than him exactly. I think I was more honest with myself about the gap between where I was and where I wanted to be. That's not a moral superiority. It's just a discipline I had to build, mostly alone, mostly in rooms where no one was watching. Doing the work when the work was invisible. Studying fund structures at midnight when Vanessa was posting vacation photos. Running the numbers on deals that didn't pan out. Showing up anyway. My father said something to me on the phone that night that I keep coming back to. He said, "I didn't know what you did." And the thing is, I had let that happen. I'd chosen invisibility so completely for so long that the people who were supposed to know me genuinely didn't. That's partly on them. And it's partly on me. There's a version of quiet strength that slides, if you're not careful, into hiding, into letting the people who underestimate you keep doing it, because correcting them feels like too much effort, or because some part of you has decided their opinion isn't worth the energy. I understand that instinct. I lived it for years, but I'm less sure now that it's always wisdom. Sometimes the people who love you badly are loving you with incomplete information. Sometimes they need to be shown, not to prove something, just to be known. I didn't save my parents' property to win an argument. I did it because it was the right thing to do with what I had. I didn't engineer Derek's exposure to humiliate him. I did it because the alternative was watching my father lose his retirement to a man who hadn't earned the trust placed in him. The intention matters, not because anyone was keeping score, but because I had to live with myself afterward, and I found that the things I can live with are the things I did for the right reasons, even when the outcome looked the same from the outside. The Forsyth property still stands. My parents still own it. Derek is in Nashville now, starting over, which I genuinely hope goes better for him than the last chapter did. And sometimes I drive down on a Sunday, sit nearest to the kitchen, and I let my mother hand me a serving dish. It's not everything, but it's something. And I've learned to tell the difference.